All right, everybody. Good evening. It is what night? What is today? Wednesday, Thursday? I can't remember what day it is. It's been a crazy
Thursday, the 13th.
Thursday, the 13th. At least it's not Friday, the 13th. But I want to welcome everybody to our weekly conversations with Commodores. And I've got number 6 coming out of South Mississippi. Of course, Kenny Simon is my guest tonight. Kenny and I have been having a good little conversation dealing with my technical difficulties. But Kenny, welcome to the show. And thanks, bud, for sticking with me and having some patience this evening.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Always good to talk to some fellow Commodores. We have a very unique experience playing at that school in Middle Tennessee, that little school that plays in that big old conference. So that's always good to chat about that.
And speaking of progress, speaking of change, speaking of some good that our administration's doing, I posted a picture that I saw on Twitter today. You may have seen it. The construction crew is on site at the stadium. So I know we're all anxiously awaiting to see the progress and things that are going on. Some cool stuff.
I want to see what's planned. I don't know if you have blueprints or schematics or anything, but I want to see what's planned. I just know when I was there, I just wanted them to get grass. I was tired of tearing my skin up on, they called that turf. I don't know. It felt like cement painted green to me.
Kenny, the version of the turf we played on before you got there was basically a thin layer of carpeting, maybe a thin layer of 1/8 of 1/2 of 1% of an inch of rubber, and then cement.
It was brutal.
We would have been better off, frankly, just being out in the parking lot off Jeff Healy. At least we
the same thing.
Planning on. Now, we can grouse about how crappy the turf is, but that's not going to get us anywhere. I want to talk about growing up in South Mississippi, playing excellent high school football against some serious athletes.
Yeah.
Like growing up, and I know you split time, Gulfport, Biloxi, and talk a little bit about your childhood and playing sports. What sports got your attention?
Yeah. Well, I tell you, so I was actually born in Gulfport, Mississippi. And then around 1985, moved with mom to Biloxi. My dad stayed in Gulfport, and so I was sort of moved back and forth, but they're pretty close cities. I mean, like if you go down to the coast, you really don't know when you're in one or the other. Right. They're pretty close. Right. And so I got introduced to sports. I didn't play my first organized football. I was about 9. And I remember playing in a league in Orange Grove, Mississippi. That was the first time I was sort of introduced to it and fell in love with it. But I had an older brother who's passed, but he was 6 years older than me, and he was playing at the high school and Harrison Central High School down there on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And just watching him and some of my people that I call my cousins, they're really just close neighbors, like Cedric Tillman, played with Steve McNair and all that. Like watching some of those guys, Dietrich Clausel, and had so much talent, Shane Matthews, all these guys playing. I was very inspirational to watch, these folks play. Even folks like Brett Favre, even though he wasn't the quarterback that we know of now, back then, right? He was actually an option guy, if you could believe it or not. So played some pretty good competition back then. I think the largest classification was 5A. And so, we had a pretty competitive district with just big schools because most of those cities down there had one school. Not very big cities, but I don't know, 50 to 60,000 people, and you got one public high school. It gets pretty competitive to get on the field, and you don't play both ways. I played offense in high school, never played defense.
I was just getting ready to say, Kenny, with that, my hometown of Dothan, Alabama was 50, 60,000 people. But in the 70s, they split our schools in half. And before that, it was one of the largest high schools in the state with over 3,000, 3,500 kids. And they were constantly, every sport, competing for state championships, getting deep into the playoffs. So I can imagine your high school was probably very similar at the time you were coming through there.
Yeah, we had a couple of pretty decent teams, and then senior year was just a disaster. They thought we would go deeper and win it all, and we just had a rough season that senior year. Had a lot of crazy stuff happen with the coaching staff, but we I think we were ranked number 2 there my junior year for a while, and I had my only really serious injury. I had another injury in Vanderbilt with my leg, but my only real serious injury was I separated a shoulder in like the last game right before the playoffs. And so we had a quarterback who was a backup quarterback, was more of a passer than an option. You know, we ran that option in the veer. And so that kind of ruined our chances there. But we had some good competitive teams, played against some great players too.
Oh, I'm sure you did. But sticking with your high school, when you came out as a senior, did you have other kids, other teammates who also played ball on the next level?
Yeah, it's crazy because, I know in the football circles, we talk about how stats don't tell the true story all the time, right? Well, I had a bunch of, all state, sort of all region guys in my own backfield, my fullback and one of my wing backs, both, we all were recruited by Mississippi State, Ole Miss, LSU, Clemson, some of the same schools were literally recruiting all three of us. And so then we had a couple of other guys that sort of rotated in that veer that were getting recruited by schools just below that, sort of like some of the Louisiana Techs. And so like you had to share the ball a lot when we played. And we had a lot of kids from my junior year and my senior year that did sign scholarships, a couple of them that signed at the SEC D1 level.
Well, how did Vanderbilt get on your radar or vice versa? And take us a little bit through your recruiting process. What other schools were of interest or showed interest to you?
Yeah, well, it was crazy. Vanderbilt just kind of came out of the blue. And, I was always more, as a kid that's, roughly 6 feet tall and, a couple hundred pounds. And I wasn't even a couple hundred pounds when I got to Vandy, right? It took me a couple of years to grow into my SEC body and have a real SEC body. But I wasn't really looking for Vanderbilt, but I always cared about my academics. My dad used to say things that just, like, I can hear him clearly. He's like, hey, you're a 6 foot, black kid that can run fast. He's like, there are 50 of them in this neighborhood. There are 10 of them on this block. Do something a little bit different, be special, in that way. But he's like, being able to play football doesn't make you special, right? I think being a student athlete makes you special, but he's just trying to make me think a little bit deeper. And so some of the very first schools that recruited me, like Clemson was probably the first school to recruit me. I remember the recruiter is, they called him Barnyard. It's Coach Farrah. And he's been all over the place. I think he was at Ole Miss for a while recruiting. He was at Clemson. And that was the first school that seriously recruited me. I remember getting the orange letters. And then LSU was pretty heavy. I would say all of the Mississippi schools that were, D1. So you got USM, Ole Miss, Mississippi State. And, I had buddies that were at Florida. So, you get interest from there. And Jack Jackson was one of my buddies that I played against in high school and in college. And so, and then even as far as Colorado, they were pretty hot and heavy on option quarterbacks. It's like Colorado and Nebraska and schools like that were coming down to like the Mississippi Gulf Coast, the Florida Panhandle, and Louisiana, because you had Cordell Stewart that had gone there, and then they went and got Tommy Frazier down, Nebraska did, right? So those were some of the schools that recruited me. Only a couple of small schools recruited me, like Samford, I think they're in Birmingham over there, like they recruited me heavily for several years. Then I had some other schools like Tulane that recruited me, but a lot of different schools. Alabama, Coach Gene Stallings, he had recruited a kid that was a little bit older than us and lived across the street. He was familiar with the area. And so a lot of those schools did recruit. So, but Vanderbilt, the way they got on my radar was, so the coach came to me, might have been, I don't know if it was during the season, my junior year, or at the end of it, he says, Vanderbilt's just requesting all this tape and this film on you. And I had no idea how they even knew I existed, right? Because back then, there weren't a lot of sort of regional camps to go to, right? And things like that. And I couldn't afford that stuff. So if they did have camps like that, it was me and my buddies would do things like pile up in a car and drive to, Mississippi State and do a one-day camp and drive home. We weren't staying overnight. We weren't paying for weekly camps. And so they just sort of, I got interested because I knew they were a great school, right? And so from that point on, it got pretty heavy. I met Coach Case. That's who recruited me. And if you've ever met Coach Case, just a very genuine, super nice guy. And he said all the right things, right? And so that got me very interested in Vanderbilt. And when I decided I was going to sign with him, you had half the city that was mad. They're like, you're not going to win a lot of football games. And then you had half the city that was like, you just made the best decision at this point in your life you could possibly make.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about that recruiting trip. Do you remember who were your hosts? Now, before you get into that story, I want to preface whatever you're about to say. And I say this every week. The statute of limitations may or may not be up on whatever you're going to share.
Got your law hat on now? Is that what we're doing?
I don't practice in Tennessee, but we got plenty of Tennessee lawyers in our group. I'm sure they would represent you and the others implemented or implicated pro bono.
Oh man, well,
with that said, Kenny, we are all ears about your recruiting trip.
My recruiting trip was actually interesting, man. Like, one of the things that was crazy is I thought the other kids were weird because their parents were on the recruiting trips with them. Like, every school I went to, like when I visited LSU, for example, like at first I thought I was big stuff because they sent a limo to pick me up. And then I realized, well, you can't fly from Gulfport, Mississippi to Baton Rouge.
Right.
I kind of had to do that.
Man, I bet you were feeling it big time.
Look, when a limo pulls up in the hood and you get in it and your buddies are out there like, oh, LSU sent a limo. I mean, it was a big deal, right? So when I came to Nashville, like, so I went alone, right? I went to all my trips. I think I visited LSU, Mississippi State, a few others, Vanderbilt, a couple of others. And then I even had a couple of those trips that you're not really supposed to go on. And then all of a sudden school calls you and we just want you to come visit the campus, right? And they sort of help you out a little bit.
Kenny, just as a side note, just so you know, for comparison's sake, when I visited Vanderbilt, I got picked up in a Chevy Blazer missing a hubcap, and it was 8-year-old Chevy Blazer at the time. And it was somebody in the football operations office, not even a coach.
Yeah.
Would be around. So just put that in perspective as you continue to share with us about your time in Nashville.
Well, they're doing it better now. I mean, these kids, like with social media and everything, man, they're like little celebrities. I mean, we got high school kids here that have more followers than some NFL players. I mean, it is different now.
Building. It's all
it is different.
Brand.
They start young. So when I visited, Robbie Young was my host, right? So spent a lot of time hanging out with him. I can't remember which dorm he lived in, but it was one of the nicer ones. So he wasn't in Towers at this point. Yeah. Nice dorm. I think it was one of those dorms that kind of sat right off campus, like or over there by Peabody across from the medical center, but had a nice little apartment over there. And I really only remember talking a lot to Royce Love, who ended up being my roommate. So Royce is down, and I think Royce either had just come from visiting, Royce was getting recruited by a lot of big schools, and he had just come from somewhere, and we were just talking about our future, right? Like a couple of 18-year-olds trying to talk about their future. Right. And I'm like, I said, man, I may seriously be coming here. And, he's asking me where I was going the following week and all that stuff. And I'm like, I may come here. And he's like, well, if you come, he gave me his number. He's like, if you come, call me. And he's like, I'll come too, and we'll be roommates. And so like we kind of made like a little deal. You should ask Royce about it if you ever talked to him. We talked about that.
I need to get being Royce roommates on the show.
Yeah, man. And so so we talked about it, and all the other stuff was kind of the usual things that you do when you go on a recruiting. Like, they take you places that you really don't see again until you're hosting someone else on a recruiting visit, right? So I can't talk about the establishments that we visited. But...
All right, we're going to pause. Women and children who are watching, please leave the room for the next 2.5 minutes. All right, they're gone. Proceed.
Well, we just went to places that were meant to entertain young people, right? And we went to, this is one of the funny things. I can't remember which order I went in on all my recruiting visits, but we went to I stayed, of course, at Lowe's right across the street.
Sure.
To a very nice steakhouse somewhere. I have no idea where it is or even what the name of it was.
It might have been called the Southern Turf.
Okay, that may have been it.
And it would have been about 6 blocks toward downtown, next door to what then was some type of a hotel.
Well, it wasn't far from campus, so that may.
Yeah. The reason why I say that, I came in the class of 86. Obviously, I was several years ahead of you, but that's where they took us the first night that we were there. I'm just assuming maybe that's where they took it. They could have taken it somewhere else, but that's just what
But it wasn't far from campus. I just can't remember exactly where it was, but like very nice. Well, I'm a poor kid from South Mississippi. I had never sat in a nice restaurant and eaten anything. And then I go there and they have, 3 forks and 2 knives. And I'm like, whose glass is that? Where's mine? Do you have sweet tea? That's all I love sweet tea. And so I just literally ordered, I think Coach Lambert, who just passed. Coach Lamb may have been there, and I remember Coach Case was there, Coach DiNardo, a couple of other coaches, and there were some other recruits there, and I can't remember who was all there except for Royce, right? Because Royce and I were kind of, we really got to know each other on the trip, and I just literally ordered whatever the coach next to me ordered. I think it was Coach Case. He ordered a steak, I ordered a steak, and then they asked him how he wanted it prepared, and I think he may have said like, and I'm country boy. I like my meat. Like you got to apply some fire to it. Like cook it all the way through. So I kind of messed over the food a little bit, like the baked potato, right? But I didn't know how to order like fancy food. I had never really done that. Like that's how new all of those experiences were for me, getting introduced to those things. But I had a great time on the trip. If you've ever talked to Robbie Young, just one of the nice, very quiet sort of guy, like one of the nicest guys you ever meet. So, none of the craziness, I'll tell you a couple of the recruiting visits I went on, there's some pretty crazy stuff like, I don't think I need to come here. I might get in trouble, especially that LSU trip. It was pretty crazy.
Well, of course, when they're picking you up in a limo, but was it during your recruiting years, either when you were on your visit or when you were a host, did they start having the stadium parties?
Yes, we would have parties at the stadium club. And I'll tell you that now it ended up, by the time I was leaving, I think they were sort of starting to ban us from having parties there because it got a little crazy.
Well, my guest next week or in 2 weeks are the DeGraffin Reeds. And I am hoping
legendary.
We'll spend a good little bit of time talking about those stadiums.
Talk to them about the activities of the stadium club. Yeah. Legendary. I mean, of course, it has the beautiful view over the stadium, and we'd have people from the other schools. So many schools right there in Nashville, and they would come over, and we were like little celebrities back then, in our own little bubbles. Those parties were epic.
Yeah,
epic. Yeah.
Well, Kenny, let's talk about your transition. You've hit on it a little bit, coming out of South Mississippi. Now you're in the big town of Nashville. You got multiple forks and spoons you got to deal with. And I mean no disrespect, but you're a big fish in a little pond coming from home like we all were.
Yes.
But now you're in Nashville, you're on campus, you're in an SEC team and school, and everybody on the team has skills. Like your dad mentioned back at home.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your confidence level as an athlete. And when did it probably didn't take very long, but once you got to campus and were starting to compete, practice, etc., and you realized, man, everybody's pretty dadgum good around here.
Everybody could play, man. Like, I mean, it is, I think about that sometimes, like how many kids you didn't get to see on the field, like very much, that could flat out play, right? And then there's a whole, we ran a strange offense. And so like, you just never saw talent exploited the way it should have been exploited. But as far as me, like Coach DiNardo didn't realize it, but he gave me a lot of confidence literally on day one. So we have the freshmen that all show up, of course, before the upperclassmen, right? Well, I had this, like my parents didn't drive me to college. My daddy never saw the campus. He passed when I was sophomore, literally right after the season, never saw the campus at all. I told you, I went on my own recruiting visits alone, all 5 of them. And I drove myself in a Chevy S10, a 1981 or 2 Chevy S10. And it was painted like, Slimer, the Ghostbuster slime. It was painted like that. And it looked like it was painted with house paint. It was terrible. It used to take me 12 hours to drive from Biloxi, Mississippi to Nashville. And I used to drive overnight because the car ran better at night. And,
Yeah,
and I was used to breaking down on
No.
65, on 59. Like I was very independent kid. So anyway, we're supposed to be up there. Let's just say it's a Monday and it's the middle of the summer. And I called Coach DiNardo and say, hey, I'm gonna be late because my truck is not behaving. Like there was like literally like there was something going on with like the oil in my truck. And so we got it fixed by a little shade tree mechanic that lived in our neighborhood. And I drove it and I was a day late. And he used me as an example to say to the other kids, like, listen, Kenny Simon was gonna be late and he called. That's responsibility, right? He's like, and so I don't know. I just, from that moment on, I felt very confident. And then when I pulled up in my little green truck, I'll never forget, Cedric Douglas and Ronnie Gordon were the first two. And, we were just thick as thieves in school back then. And they literally, like, I couldn't even get out of my door. And they already were, hey, Simon, what's up, man? Like we had known each other for 20 years. And they were amazed that I drove myself and all I had was a suitcase and a trunk. They were like, where's all your stuff? And I'm like, it's right here, right? And so, but coming in, I always played against older kids when I was a kid, like, my older brothers and stuff like that. So I wasn't worried about the fact that I may be competing against a 23-year-old. Like that didn't bother me at all. In fact, they will tell you the class of 92, when we came in that recruiting class in 1992, they would tell us we were a little bit disrespectful because of how much trash we talked. And we were like, well, this is kind of what we do, and I just remember like freshmen at one point, and a couple of some of the rising sophomores, we were scrimmaging the upperclassmen, right? And, of course, we were just doing the best we could against them, but we weren't backing down. And there was a whole thing. So I didn't struggle with any confidence. The only thing I needed to do was, when you're in high school, you don't really like to lift weights. Like, I didn't mind squatting and all that stuff, but like your bench pressing and getting your upper body right, you just don't realize how far behind you are on that when you've been a pretty good athlete in high school. And so I had to get more confidence in the weight room the first year I was there. But as far as my abilities, I didn't miss a beat. I mean, I stepped on the campus feeling pretty confident that I could play with anyone.
Well, I tell you, having the athletic ability is one part of the equation. Your gifts that God gives you, that's one part.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the confidence as an athlete, it doesn't matter what your skill set is.
It's true.
And just the way you described it, we all have that awesome confidence. Our juniors, and senior years of high school, we're making our name, it's getting out there, we're setting records, we're playing in the playoffs and all this good stuff. We get all the recognitions, we're puffing out,
Yeah.
Then when you get to campus as a pure freshman, typically an 18-year-old freshman, it's hard to maintain that confidence because everybody else has got that confidence.
Yeah.
But that in and of itself puts you on the field.
Yeah. It was but it I had some good folks though. Bernard, like Marcus Wilson, man, was like big brother to us.
Doc was he was behind me. We're not that far apart.
Yeah.
Doc came in my senior year with Mike Healy, one donut.
Yep.
And the two of them could not have been more different as quarterbacks as any two on a team I've ever been around.
Yeah.
Let me give you a side, and I'm gonna get Doc on here sometime. I've already had Heels. We were at Tennessee, I think it was Tennessee, one of my last games in '89, their freshman year. I don't know why we did this. This was dumb. The quarterbacks pre-game, or it may have been even Friday walkthrough, we're going to see who can throw the ball the furthest competition.
Yeah.
Why in the world we would do that during the season? Because we were just dumb. We all throw. Doc is last. We're all within about 5 to 10 to 12 yards of each other, 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
Doc's ball just keeps going. And I would say he threw it about 90 yards that day.
Doc could throw 75, 80 yards when I was there. Oh. And just a good, I think what Doc appreciated is like, so it was funny, you had 3 freshman quarterbacks come in, and then I think what was a little bit unfortunate is they had some talented quarterbacks that were there, but they were passing quarterbacks, right?
Yeah.
Like, look, you talk about a strong arm. Joe Peoples
Oh, Joe
had a stronger arm than
yeah.
Marcus, right? Like, I mean, could throw darts, right? And so, but I had some good people in that quarterback room, and I didn't want to be a quarterback, by the way, at all. Like all those other schools were like, yeah, you're gonna be a slot receiver, you're gonna be a wide out, and some of them we were talking defense. I was like, I'm not gonna do defense, but I love to play slot wide out. And I'd watch my buddy Jack Jackson down in Florida playing the slot, catching 2 or 3. You know, it running our offense, it'd take me a whole season to catch 15 passes, and he's catching 9, 10 a game, right?
Well, Kenny, who else in your class were also recruited as quarterbacks coming in?
So we had Ronnie Gordon, and Ronnie, of course, came out of Daugherty, Georgia. I think about him all the time because I officiate now, and I also train officials in the state of Georgia, and so I move all around the state in the summer training. And so cool. I always, when I see some of these high schools, I remember players that I played with that went to these high schools. I'm like, wow, that's a hole in the wall stadium, you know, a little. So, and then there was Cedric Douglas that came out of Dallas Carter, right? So, of course, esteemed high school in Dallas, right? And we were all a very good mix of like, it was a common, like if you could have made us one person, perfect running quarterback. I think Cedric probably had the best touch in terms of throwing the ball. Ronnie Gordon had a nice arm. If we had gone to passing, you would have probably seen how strong Ronnie Gordon's arm was. Ronnie had a great arm and could throw. We just didn't throw it enough for him to ever get in a rhythm, or anybody. And then I probably was the better athlete and probably the person who was the best option quarterback, which is why I played before they did. But I mean, just very talented folks that came in, and there were already a few guys already there that could play as well. We probably had 7 or 8 quarterbacks.
I was going to say it was a pretty loaded.
It was a busy position room. It was pretty crowded in there.
Let's stay off the field for a minute and talk about you had mentioned one of the things that separated you from the others in your community coming out of school was you were real academic oriented.
Yeah.
In the SEC, it doesn't get any more academic oriented than Vanderbilt.
Right.
How was the transition from your high school academics to the Vanderbilt requirements?
And that was nuts. I will tell, like, the couple of things. So I'll shorten the story, short story. I came to campus thinking I was majoring in physical therapy and business as a double major. I've always wanted to be a physical therapist, practice it, teach it. I'm like, maybe I want my own, you know, you're ambitious when you're 18. Maybe I want my own physical therapy place. I'll do that. So I get there, and that's not, they don't even have the major. They registered for us. Like, once they knew what you wanted to do, they registered for you. And so for, I don't know, 2 weeks, I was trying to figure out what my major was. And I ran into Ellen Penderhughes, who broke it down for me. And I was actually going to leave Vanderbilt. I was like, what is this human and organizational development? And I have no idea what this is. I am not happy with it. And I was, you know, only the players knew about that were sort of in my class. I'm like, I'm not staying here. I was literally on my way to Florida. And I talked to my dad, and he was like, you just pick up a little pre-med concentration and you do this. And they sent us, like, you know, it was a book about this thick that sort of described all the majors in detail, which I probably missed because 18-year-olds don't read like they should.
That's right.
And I went into a certain concentration there, and he's like, you can get wherever you want doing that. So I took a lot of pre-med classes and all that. But I'll tell you, the first test I ever took at Vanderbilt was a Psychology 101 course. And I'm drawing a blank on the professor's name. I think it was Ray. But I remember looking at my syllabus and looking at the book, and it was the same name. And that just blew my mind. I'm like, he wrote this book, right? Like, so that blew my mind. I studied for like 3 weeks. Not kidding. You can ask Roy Slow. I studied every day, like whatever we read, and then I'd study it, I memorized it, and I took the test. You know, it's a big lecture class, so there are 200 kids in there or whatever. and I made a C minus. I mean, the lowest C you could make. And I'm like, if 3 weeks of studying got me a C, I called my dad.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't think we're gonna be, I don't think we're gonna be here
buy
long.
season tickets just yet.
This is not gonna cut it. I'm like, I made a C minus, and he's laughing, of course, on the other end, like, trust me, you'll be okay.
Yeah.
And the first semester itself was rough. Like I had a 2.5 or a 2.6, and it ended up being pretty decent, relatively 2.7 maybe. And but that transition when you play a sport and you're getting a little bit of playing time as a true freshman, and you're adjusting to being, you know, on campus and handling your own business. And then Vanderbilt is not an easy school. I mean, it's challenging academically.
You
right?
know what it is, Kenny? It's being thrown into the deep end and saying swim, because you got to be organized. You've got to have a schedule, and if you're not, then you're just out there floating, and there is no island, there's no boat, there's nothing to save you until you figure out how to swim.
Yeah, it was rough. I mean, I remember like getting the grades, like they mailed the grades that Christmas break, and just being disappointed. I had never had a 2.6 or whatever it was, 2.5, 2.7. And I remember it was enough though to get me off of study hall, because I remember like literally we had to get up, and the coaches would make, if you were a freshman or you were an upperclassman and your grades weren't right, you'd have to come to study hall, and you had Brad Bates and Derek Gregg and a lot of these guys who have gone on to do great things, but they were sort of our, you know, GAs, and like they come get you. Like D. Gregg would knock on your door, right? Like, and drag you out of bed if he had to.
D. Gregg is one of my teammates. He came in with the fellas in '88 with all of those great players, including Corey Harris and all those guys.
Yeah.
And don't you dare underthrow D. Gregg in practice. I'll leave it at that.
Oh, it's like, I'm going to ask him about that.
He's doing some wonderful things up at Northwestern, and we certainly wish him well. And Coach Bates was our strength and conditioning coach.
Yeah.
And if you've watched any of our shows, we've talked about with Coach Bates and many others, we had the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And what that was, Kenny, was off season on Valentine's Day, about 87 or 88. Snow is everywhere, but it's a off season team competition, team building within the team. We're divided up.
Yeah.
And part of one of the things that we had to do was push a sedan loaded with weights in the trunk up the parking deck, that parking deck right near the field. And now we learn that Dwayne Jones, who will watch this, and I know he's going to watch this, still holding this against him. He could every once in a while put the parking brake on or apply the brake. 4 guys pushing this thing up. Anyway, Coach Bates was innovative.
He was.
Strength and conditioning techniques and things. And I don't know, and I know I'm kind of overtaking your story, but I wanted to share one other thing. Did y'all use the rowing machines when you were in school? The literal.
They were in there. They were in there, but like, you know, maybe if you were injured, you know, a lower body injury, and but I would say I did not use those very often.
Well, those were everything else. They were probably being phased out by the time you were coming through, but that was an integral part of our conditioning. Yeah. So much so that Coach Bates took a group of the linemen up to Cincinnati, I think it was, maybe in Cleveland or Cincinnati, for the national rowing competition.
Get out.
No, this is true.
We were definitely, there may have been 4 rowers in there by the time we got there. And then the girls worked out.
I wore them out because they entered that competition up in, I think it was in Cincinnati. And I think they were the only collegiate players there, much bigger than the guys who were there for the real reason.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was Coach Bates, that was D. Gregg, but you had them in a little bit different roles by the time you came through.
Different roles. And you know, it was I mean, it was challenging though. You know, but those guys kind of helped us, and Brad was a stickler for, he actually would try to teach people how to, there were things you just didn't know how to do in high school. Like you really didn't know how to write a paper. Most of us were like, school came easy to us in high school, right? And so you never sat down and like did an outline and really thought about your thoughts, and then like start putting meat to your outline, and then that made it so much easier to write a paper. We would just start writing a paper when we were in high school, and it had no flow or anything. I remember Brad literally like getting on people's nerves because he'd say, he'd look at your syllabus, and if it was a month away that you had a paper, he was like, well, give me, I want an outline, in a week.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, kids are like, why do I have to do that now? But he would ride you. And of course, D. Greg was just good at like motivating you. And he was kind of like the big brother, but he was the big brother that wasn't going to let you screw up. Right. So we had some good people. And I will tell you, after that first semester, and I didn't have to get up at 5 a.m., like literally, I used to fall asleep. I'd be in the elevator of Lupton, leaning against the wall.
Oh, yeah.
Falling asleep, riding down. We stayed on the 5th floor. Yeah. Falling asleep, riding down. We would be that tired. And but after that first semester, like school, it wasn't easy for me, but like it just became easier for me to manage my schedule. And I had excellent grades from there on out. But that first semester made me feel like, yeah, academically, man, this is gonna be something different.
Kenny, we were on the 3rd floor of Lupton, and we're so tired we didn't use the stairs. We would only take the elevators.
Yeah.
And we'd get all kind of, what are you doing in the elevator? I'm like, shut up, you go to practice.
We had friends though, Bernard, like that were just, the normal students. We call them the regular students, right? Sure. And I just really don't think, sometimes when I hear people talking about student athletes, I'm like, you have no idea what that kid is going through to like be in school and play ball. And they say, well, it's a free scholarship. I'm like, there's nothing free about it. He has earned it. He or she has earned that, right? Because we were pretty tight with some of the basketball players, the men's and women's basketball team. And I'm like student athletes, like if that's free,
yeah.
And but yeah, they've earned it all. But yeah, we were same thing. We were riding elevators everywhere we could and wearing slides, right? And the easiest clothes to put on.
That's right. That's right. Ours were tennis shoes with the heels cut out.
That's too old school right there, man.
Real old school.
We may walk on the heel,
right?
We may walk on it, but we didn't cut it out, man.
These were like the old turf shoes. When they got worn out, you didn't throw them out. You just cut out the heel. You slid them on.
That's terrible. They were like Crocs before Crocs. Huh?
Oh man, we were so cool. You have no idea how cool we were. Kenny, let's talk about playing in some ball games your freshman year. You're probably playing in front of hundreds, if not a few thousand in your games in South Mississippi. Maybe a big game might be a 5,000 or 10,000 folks.
Yeah.
Well, the smallest you'll ever play in Vanderbilt is going to be at home, and it's going to be 40K in the stands. You're going to Florida, it's 80K. You're going to Bama, it's 100. Yeah. How big were your eyes, or were you able to really kind of focus on the task at hand, or was it just, holy smokes, we're here?
It was, I think what made it surreal, like I wasn't overwhelmed. I don't think, I don't know. I can't speak for everyone, but like just, we had a very confident group of athletes, right? Like, I mean, sometimes I think about what if we had run a slightly different offense? What could we have done? I mean, so we were pretty confident, but I will tell you, when you play, Alabama, and there are more Alabama fans in your stadium than there are yours, and they're just ridiculously loud. And I had been to a few games as a recruit, and so I kind of was, they were big schools, SEC, schools. So I was kind of introduced to the environment a little bit. But I think what made the difference for me, like when I would play, of course Doc was the starter and I was his backup, and I would play, is the speed of everyone. Like everyone. Like sure, in a foot race, you could beat every D lineman and and linebacker you're going to race, and probably some safeties and a few corners, right? But when a linebacker is 255 pounds and he is just fast enough to where your angle, like he can get an angle and still get you, or you make a move and you make him miss, and here comes his buddy because he just shed a block and he's just getting there so fast, or how they're fitting in the holes real quick. And I think the speed rather than like the size of the stadium and all that is what I had to sort of get used to. You run 15 yards downfield and you look up and Shannon Brown is laying on you because he got in on the tackle. You're like, where's your 300-pound, 6'6" self come from, right? Yeah. I mean, it's just that took some getting used to. And I remember my dad, who was watching one of the games, might be my freshman or sophomore year, and he said, "You look so small just standing next to, all these people." And he's like, "And I know you're a couple hundred pounds, and he's like, but you look 5'5", standing next to some of these guys."
Look at, and this is obviously a different generation, but look at Bryce Young standing next to his lineman.
Yeah.
He looks like a miniature version of a kid. I mean, the contrast is so stark.
Yes.
But, if you're under 6 feet tall as a quarterback, particularly in the SEC, if you can't find those angles, if you're a passing quarterback,
Yeah.
you're not going to be playing that much. So all the props in the world to those who do find those angles and can figure that. I mean, there's obviously tons of them have occurred and been successful. What's his name from the Saints as good as ever been.
Drew was excellent at it, and I don't think he was 6 feet tall, because I've stood next to Drew Brees and he was 2 inches shorter than me.
Yeah, but it's different. I had John Gromos was a year ahead of me. John 6'5", he was the classic size drop back quarterback for the time. But as you mentioned, with the offenses, we had 3 different offenses and 3 different coordinators in my 4 years, because the personnel just was different.
Yeah.
And so you had to adapt, particularly at Vanderbilt. Our ones may be as accomplished athletes as the ones we're playing, but
100%.
Then the depth
is what got us. Same here. Same here. Like we'd hit people in the mouth for 3 quarters. Yeah. Right. And then you just. I mean, I remember this vividly. I actually messed with him about it. James Manley and I just worked the 6A state championship in Georgia, right? Like just D1 talent all over the field. Langston Hughes versus Buford. Anything about Georgia football, these are powerhouse schools. Yeah. And when we were just sitting in the locker room before the game, we were waiting on the game before us to be done, and talked about how like James Manley was terrifying Peyton Manning in our last game. Like he was just abusing the offensive line for 3 quarters. And then 4th quarter, he was so worn out because the rotation just, it's different, right? And so he was extremely tired by the 4th quarter, because we can't go 2 and 3 deep in a lot of instances, especially if we have injuries. So yeah.
Talk about being in the huddle in an SEC game.
Yeah.
You can't step back and say, "Oh, look at me! Look where I've gotten to." The athlete, the competitor in you has just got to be locked in. And at that time, were y'all huddling? How were plays coming in? Were they being signaled? Share a little bit about the DiNardo offensive experience that you went through.
Yeah, it was, I would say, like, you had to be locked in. We actually, so we would do a mixture of things. Every now and then, like, our receivers didn't get a lot of action, right? Which bothers me to this day. But sometimes we'd send the plays in by them, but coach also signaled a lot of things. And you go up to the line and you got 4 plays in your head sometimes, right? There was always sort of what he called, and you could do the opposite of that, meaning just flip it, or you could audible to 1 of 2 or 3 plays, but even that was limited. Like you could never audible to a pass. You get shot if you did that. You're gonna run it. You're just gonna run it, and you're gonna run it some more. But it was easy to be locked in when you were like a QB in particular, because I'm walking up to the line, and when you're predominantly a running offense, and we're in a set where there's only 1 receiver out there, you're gonna have 8 or 9 guys in the box.
That's right.
Every now and then, if we shifted to something where we had 2 receivers, I'm looking at pre-snap. I'm doing a read pre-snap, and then I'm verifying that on the snap. And so you're so locked into what this defense may be doing, and and calling those things out and making sure your players are locked in. Like oftentimes you don't even notice the crowd. Yeah. Like we may as well be in an empty stadium at times that you're so locked in.
I was gonna say you got to have a little bit of blinders on or maybe earmuffs, not blinders, but earmuffs. Because if you let too much of that come in, you can't do your job
at all,
or you're going to get hurt if you're not really that locked in. Kenny, a few folks in the Facebook group I already told them we're not live. OJ Fleming says hello. James Manley says hello. Coach Gary Shepard says hello.
Oh, cool.
And I just wanted to make sure that you saw that. Guys, I'm talking with Kenny Simon, coming out of South Mississippi, playing for DiNardo in the 90s. He's in a very crowded quarterback room now.
Very.
At one point, you made a pivot. You were no longer under center. You had some other responsibilities. Talk about that transition a little bit.
Well, it was funny. I would say, like, I don't know. I like, when you're in high school, I'm a above average passer. I had a decent arm. I could play. I'm not gonna throw the 90-yard passes, but you're 25 and in, man. I can put it on you, right? But when you don't throw a lot, it makes it hard to be or get better as a passer. And we didn't throw at all. And so when we would go to pass, everyone in the stadium knew we were going to throw. And so I just think, one of the conversations that Coach DiNardo and I had, we always talked about the potential of me moving, right? And he's like, probably got to get somebody who at least can, who just a little bit better passer, but I need you on the field, right? So he literally is like, hey, let's just move you to receiver. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I was excited about it. And I remember I can't remember exactly what game, but literally I went from being the starting quarterback to like starting wide out, like the very next practice. Like one practice I was starting quarterback, the next one I was a starting wide out. And who was waiting on me in the first practice? Like, I've been wanting to get my hands on you. Nobody but Robert Davis, right? Robert Earl, as we call him, who I still to this day think is one of the best cornerbacks I've ever seen. Like, I don't care what jersey, like with the right opportunities and, no injuries. I just think that man could have played 15 years in the NFL. Just amazing cornerback. And so Robert and I had some epic battles, literally starting from the first practice. We were in sort of a one-on-one drill, and he wants to play bump and run on the new guy, right? And I was ready for the challenge. So it was fun, but literally it went from your quarterback here now, and then you're wide out. But in my senior year in high school, I played every position on offense. Just that I'd be running back, I'd be quarterback, I'd be a wide out. And so I was pretty comfortable moving around on the field in terms of position. But we need to get someone under that center who, when we did throw it that 6 times a game, probably was going to have a better shot at getting it there than I did.
And who became the quarterback? Ronnie
Gordon, right?
Now, take us to your welcome to the SEC as a wide receiver moment.
So there was, I would say, the true moment of welcome to the SEC was probably, I think we were playing Florida. And so a couple of things happened. One, I ran a reverse, and I made like a couple of linebackers miss, and one of the defensive ends, like he fell. He was 6'6". I don't know if it was Javon Curse. It was one of those big, rangy D ends who went to the NFL and played forever. And literally, I'm thinking I'm far enough from him to where there's no way he can touch me. And he falls and he rakes my arm with the ball, just enough for the ball to bobble and for me to catch it. And instead of having a 30-yard run, I get a 10-yard run, just enough for the first down. Like that. And then they had a safety, who I think his last name was Lott. And they used to joke and say, I used to ask Jack, I'm like, is that Ronnie Lott's nephew? And he would joke like, yes, it really is. Yeah. And I did a crackback block back when you could do that, right? Back when you could blindside block. And I mean, literally, when you watched it on film, like I took him out of the shot. Like, I mean, you just saw me laying into him and then us both leaving the screen. Well, after that, they knew Vanderbilt receivers would block. We would cut you, we would, block hard. He wasn't trying to make any tackles anymore. Like, me and him were just literally like, we were running this certain play and he was just running beeline for me. And he was a lot heavier and a lot stronger. Mm-hmm. And so that, just like the competitive nature and just the amount of, like, football is unnatural, right? And you kind of discover that when you start running into some people who don't mind running into you. Yeah. Right. And so that, and then there was a moment once when, this might have been when I was playing quarterback. Coach DiNardo said, look, you're going to have to learn to fall, and you can't take on linebackers, especially when he's like, why are you going to take an extra shot? He's like, you can't be a mean runner. I need you to be a safe runner. Mm-hmm. Right. So there were a lot of moments when I'm like, yeah, you're in the SEC. And I will tell you, not knocking any other conferences, but when we played non-conference teams, it was much more comfortable.
I was going to say it's a whole different level of competition.
Much more comfortable. And I mean, and I'm not knocking anyone, but we played Wake Forest and Duke, and I think we played Cincinnati a couple, and it was not the same thing.
The parity is obviously there now, but in the last 20 years and further back, there was a huge gap between the haves and
It
have
was.
from an athletic standpoint. Ronnie, I want to talk about life on campus.
Yeah.
Did you pledge a fraternity? Talk about your fraternity life a little bit. And
Yeah.
did you have other teammates in the fraternity? How did fraternity life and football life and campus life, how were you able to intertwine them and not create problems for you?
It's funny, man. We really had a bunch of, I was a pretty disciplined kid, and we had a lot of other disciplined kids. And so I did pledge. I'm a member of Kappa Alpha Psi. And so is Robert Davis, right? And so is Robbie Young, so is Aaron Smith, so a lot of the Kappas, and so is Derek Gregg, right? So a lot of the Kappas were athletes anyway, right? Gabe Banks, right? And so it was a pretty easy it almost felt like a football fraternity at times, because the few guys that were not, that were in the fraternity that weren't athletes, a couple of them. All the rest seemed to be athletes. And so
Patrick Fitch.
I know Mr. Fitch well, who is also one of my good fraternity brothers. He rescued me a couple of times when I was rushing, as they like to say.
Let me blow your mind. Patrick is 1 year younger than me. Patrick and I grew up together in Dothan, Alabama. Patrick was my right tackle in high school.
I've seen pictures, and now I need to go back and look, because Willie Banks is one of my buddies who also was on that team.
Willie Banks is one of my buddies. We're the same graduating class. Grayson High School.
Yep.
Well, you talk about a powerhouse high school right there.
Yes.
They came over and played Hoover, beat the pants off of them about 3 years ago. I went to the game.
I remember that.
They had over 40 seniors.
Yes.
Unbelievable. I outweighed Patrick by 10 pounds my senior year, his junior year. I'm his quarterback. He's my right tackle.
I can't believe he played tackle, but Patrick, we messed with him about that. Yeah. You guys won a state championship too, didn't you? One of those years.
Yeah. We sure did. 6A state champs in '85. That's right.
Wow.
Yep.
That is cool. Small world, man. Small world. But yeah, I know Patrick.
Where were the step shows? Because I went to more than one. Where were they held? Were any of them held on campus your years?
Yeah. Yeah. So there were a couple of places. So kind of like the rec center, where they would sort of set up like a stage and sort of put curtains up and all that stuff, set some seats up. So we had them there. Then there were a couple of other auditoriums on campus. I cannot remember which auditorium. There were a couple of other auditoriums on campus. I know when I was there, we had probably 4 or 5 step shows. And so it was either the rec center or one of those auditoriums.
We didn't have a rec center until my senior year, but I went to 2 different shows, and Patrick or somebody else watching this will certainly know. You're right about those auditoriums. They weren't far from the medical and law schools, that side of campus, but I am completely drawing a blank as to the name of the building. But that's where we went during our years. Well, but Kenny, when football responsibilities came up and academic responsibilities conflicted, and then maybe even fraternity responsibilities, how were you able to weave the 3 of those and be able to satisfy each of those 3 parts of your college life at the time?
Yeah, it's funny. I look back on it and it was I was just blessed to be able to either reorganize things, or I would say this, I like to stay ahead of the curve on my books. I never wanted to come back from playing the University of Florida and, you got a chemistry final, that Monday or something like that, right? And so, because, you got bruised ribs, you got jammed fingers, your ankle's hurting, and I twisted my ankle quite a bit, a lot of shoestring tackles. And so I stayed ahead of the curve on that. And so usually like I was pretty good on the academic piece, but I'm telling you, like some of the other things, like the social life, I used to joke with the fellas, like, look, if there are 3 parties this week, I'm going to 2, or I'm going to 1, right? And I kind of stuck to it, right? And people respected it. Like I never was challenged on any of that stuff, but I'm like, look, you guys went out Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night. Like I'll see you all Friday and Saturday.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I was out, it was, I wouldn't say it was easy to prioritize, but I kept the books were the most important. I'm like, I didn't come up here to not graduate.
Yeah.
Because I saw a lot of my buddies that did go to other big schools. And I remember watching the Sugar Bowl with a couple of my buddies, and they were playing, and they didn't get degrees. Yeah. Right. They never graduated. I'm like, I didn't come here to not graduate. Like, if I'm not going to win 9 games and go to a bowl game, I want this degree that's going to carry me for 40 years. And it's kind of worked out for me.
I want to pivot to right there. What was it about graduating from Vanderbilt that set you up, which hopefully will be the rest of your professional career? Yeah.
So when I came out, I got accepted to a couple of schools of allied health to go actually I wanted to get a master's and then a PhD in physical therapy. And the master's programs back then were like, they were 3 years and then a couple more years to get a doctorate. And you and I were chatting earlier, and I told you how like personal finance is like a passion of mine. I don't do it for a living, but I just kind of do some things on the side. I teach a lot of personal finance classes. And even way back then, I remember I was University of North Carolina I wanted to go to. And I got accepted. I never forget, I got the call over spring break back when we had answering machines like in your room.
That's right.
And so got the call. And when I started talking to them, obviously I'm not a resident of North Carolina. And it was like, they said, look, the first 2 years, you're basically in med school. You won't be able to work. So you need to get enough loans to pay for school and to cover your living expenses.
Yeah.
And it was gonna be like $40,000. This is 1996. Yeah. I'm like, my mom doesn't make $40,000.
Yeah.
Right. And so I literally, like, they let me hold the seat for a year. I still have the letter from when I got accepted. That really was my first choice in career. But I always wanted to do the teaching piece. And so I remember interviewing on campus. Some of my professors from Peabody were like, look, there's this change management thing that's going on, and you got Anderson Consulting, which is Accenture now, and Deloitte, and all these people that are looking for human capital professionals that have this OD majors, So I started interviewing. It was like making the high school basketball team. Like the list started off this long, and it gets smaller and smaller each week. And I got on at Anderson. And they only recruited you if you had a certain GPA and you went to certain schools. They were pretty exclusive then. Like they didn't go to, some of the schools in the area. They come to Vanderbilt, and they came to Atlanta, they'd go to Emory and maybe Georgia Tech. And so that started a pretty good career. And I will tell you, even to this day, when people ask where you went to school and you say you went to Vanderbilt, they sort of go, wow, must be smart. And whether I'm the smartest person in the room or not, when they say that, I take advantage of that. Like, yeah, I'm all right, So I will tell you, the degree, we used to joke about it being, I saw some kids say it this weekend when he committed to Vanderbilt. And I'm like, it's the same thing I said years ago. I'm like, I'm making a 40-year decision, not a 4-year decision to win a bunch of football games.
That's the Martin kid, the 4-star out of Marietta.
Smart.
And as a side note, I think he may be the first Vanderbilt committee, and he signed, I think today or yesterday, to ever play in that U.S. Army All-American game.
Yeah.
And make his announcement at the game. And then I later learned there was a second commit who also played in the game. Yeah. So if you don't think Coach Lee isn't changing the culture and reaching the kids that have been unreachable, you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
It really is. And that was great. I got 4 different folks texting me, did you see this? I'm like, yeah, I saw that. Coach Lee.
I saw it. But I mean, it's like nobody else can offer what Vanderbilt offers. Like if you're short-sighted and you think, like your kid can make to the NFL from Vanderbilt. Absolutely. And he's going to graduate, right? But if you're short-sighted, you think football is the only way. And I'm like, listen, I've known a lot of great athletes, a lot of great athletes. Some that went to college and like didn't get the degree and all that stuff. These kids need to graduate. And even some that went to the NFL and they played 2 years, they played 3 years, not enough time to make a lot of money. One of my buddies jokes to this day, he's like, you know, I should have just did what you did, because over these years you've made more money than I ever made in the NFL, and as a working person.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just a smart decision. But when you're talking to a bunch of 18-year-olds, they don't think so. They want what's pretty, right? They want the Clemson or the Alabama or the Georgia because that looks good.
And it's what
you know,
see right here.
Yeah.
It really is. Kenny, you're still around, and I'm going to get you out of here in a couple of minutes. And I really appreciate your conversation and sharing your story. You mentioned that you and James Manley are still around the game refereeing. So
Yeah.
you see the modern athlete, the kid who has, and you may or may not know any of them personally, but you know they've all got their brands and they've got their followers, and they got to make this post and that post. And that's the world that they live in. Clearly, it's not the world you and I grew up in.
Right.
But we're just old dudes, or at least I am. My question to you is, you got a kid, your child is 20, may or may not be in the sports world any longer. But I guess I want to ask you some advice.
Yeah.
If you're talking to either a parent or a child who, let's say they're 14 or 15,
Yeah.
Freshman, sophomore, how do you keep your focus? How do you not so caught up in the social media world that you lose some of that focus?
You know, I will tell you, it's incredibly tough because, you know, back when, like, I believed everything my dad said, everything he said, everything. He was so real. I believed everything he said. So when my dad said football doesn't make you special, or, you know, or playing basketball or hitting the baseball, or, you know, I played a lot of sports. It's like, it's this, you know, the combination of that. He's like, that's just your way of getting in the door, right? To get what you really want. There were no other distractions to speak against him. Yeah. And I had 2 older brothers saying the same. One of my brothers that's next to me, he went to school on an academic scholarship. My oldest went to play football. He ended up going to like Delta State and Mississippi Gulf Coast to play football. But we were athletic, but we all cared about the books. These kids now, you know, social media is a distraction for a 14 or 15-year-old. You know how immature and silly we were at that age. Like, some of the decisions we made probably should be dead, literally, like from doing silly stuff. So I would tell a parent, like, the earlier you can get to your kid and tell them being great at a sport does not make you special, right? Like that will not carry you. I have a younger cousin who just finished playing in the NFL for like 11 or 12 years, and he's in his early 30s. So it's like, so what are you gonna do with the rest of your life now? So even if you play to the highest levels, right, and you play for a while, you're still young when you're done. It's a young sports are a young person's game. So like, the sooner you can get them caring about the things that are important and realizing you can be great at sports and you can be good in the classroom. It's all about where they put their energy. So if you can get them to put their energy in those places, you can do it. You can be the best player on the field and the smartest kid in the classroom. It is possible.
It is, and what I'm about to say could open up a can of worms, and you and I be here all night debating this and talking about it. But you either love it or you hate it about the new NCAA rules allowing for name, image, and likeness.
Yeah.
And what kills me, and this is the old guy coming out, is when I see a headline that says so-and-so school is offering 1 point whatever million if so-and-so will transfer. And it's free agency on the college level. And I know that every generation, what we were running in college back in the day, then high schools followed, because colleges follow with the NFL. It trickles down. I get that. I just hope, and I heard Coach Saban say this week or last week, is there has got to be some regulations put into place. Could you imagine when we were coming through? I mean, maybe Mr. Gaddy's Pizza might have sponsored me, but that'd have been about the only
Free pizzas.
NIL deal.
Free pizzas.
That's right. Free crappy pizza. I can't thank you enough, my friend, for spending some time sharing your journey, sharing your experiences.
Yeah, it's been fun.
This is why I do these conversations each week. It's telling the history of our program. It's sharing a little bit of our shared experiences, but it's also your unique experiences. And these conversations with Commodores are just so much fun for me. I hope it's been tolerable and okay for you.
It's been great. We still talk about stuff, and it's funny, like the things you remember and you don't remember, and sometimes you forget entire seasons. Like, I don't remember the 91 season or whatever, right?
That's right.
But it's fun, and I appreciate you doing this, sort of keeping some of these stories alive and building a community of folks, man. Like, we have some things to be proud of in terms of, being graduates and ex-athletes from Vanderbilt. We've got some ways a ways to go before that football team is as competitive as we like, but we know we're graduating good men. We know we are graduating our athletes, and that they'll do good things in the world, man. I'll take that trade. So
Absolutely.
Thank you for doing what you do, man.
Certainly, my friend. I wanted, before we sign off, today is Thursday, January 13th, and this is from Kenny Cole in Huntsville. As you guys know, Kenny is organizing this awesome reunion this weekend, weather permitting. And I want to read to you what he wrote to me to share with you guys. More than 35 are confirmed attendees coming from Dallas, Atlanta, and West Virginia, and many other locations. Coach Lee, Coach Lustig, and Chris Griffin plan to attend. And it really all started because Jim Arnold, the golden leg, and teammates decided to get together just to share some good memories and some fun times.
Yeah.
Weather permitting. And if you guys go into the group, Kenny's put all the details, the address, his number, and everything in there. If you're wanting to show up, give him a holler, let him know you're coming. I'm so bummed. I have a prior family wedding engagement I've got to go to, or otherwise I'd be there with bells on. But if you guys can get to Huntsville, go spend some time. I'm sure there'll be a lot of tall tales spoken at that, shared.
Oh, you know how it goes. Yeah, the 15-yard touchdown becomes a 30-yard touchdown.
At least.
Love it.
Well, guys, this is it for us for tonight for Conversations with Commodores. Please keep coming back each week. I've got a whole bunch of folks coming, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So you guys be well, be safe, and we'll catch you next week.
All right.